At my father's 70th birthday gala, he handed out sealed envelopes with trust fund access to every grandchild except my 15-year-old son. Instead, he gave him a blank job application with a sticky note reading, "Some of us are just born to serve." Then my brother smirked and asked how it felt to be the permanent underclass. I smiled back, and the color vanished from my parents' faces. The private dining room at the Sterling Room smelled of roasted prime rib, aged Bordeaux, and the suffocating perfume my mother imported from Paris. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, expensive glow over the heavy mahogany table. There were 20 of us gathered to celebrate Arthur Trask, the self-made king of sterling logistics, the man who supposedly built an empire on grit and family values. My son Eli sat perfectly still. He held the cheap paper of the application while his cousins, Caden and Blythe, eagerly tore into their thick ivory envelopes. Caden actually whooped when he saw the balance of his new index fund. Blythe leaned over to show her mother, gasping at the six-figure number printed on the bank letterhead. Eli didn't say a word. He was 15. He was smart enough to keep his eyes glued to the white linen tablecloth, but watching his shoulders sink broke something deep and permanent inside me. My mother, Constance, had slid the application across the table with a tragic little sigh, like she was offering condolences at a funeral. "You know your grandfather believes in the value of hard work, Eli," she had murmured, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. I had reached out and gently pulled the yellow sticky note from Eli's rigid fingers. I read the handwriting, my father's handwriting. "Some of us are just born to serve." That was the grand gesture. The entire room felt like it had been dunked in ice water. Conversations at the far end of the table died out. Someone's fork scraped loudly against a porcelain plate. Then my brother Julian leaned toward us. He wore a bespoke Italian suit and a smirk he'd spent 40 years perfecting for an audience. "How does it feel to be the permanent underclass?" he whispered loudly. My husband, Daniel, gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. His heavy oak chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor as he started to rise. I placed a single hand on his arm. He froze, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. I looked at Julian. I looked at my father, who was swirling his wine with a look of bored satisfaction, and I smiled. My mother caught my expression first. The smug satisfaction melted off her face like wax held to a flame. Her hand drifted up to her pearl necklace. "Vivian," she stammered, her voice suddenly thin and hollow. "What is that look?" I didn't answer her. I stood up, smoothed the front of my dress, and walked calmly out of the dining room. I ignored the maître d' who asked if I needed anything. I walked straight to the coat check. Sitting in the deep right pocket of my wool trench coat, exactly where I had tucked it at 6:30 that evening, was a thick, silver encrypted hard drive. It weighed about as much as a brick. For 12 years, I had been the invisible backbone of Sterling Logistics. I wasn't an executive. I didn't get invited to the board retreats in Aspen. I built their network infrastructure. I managed their cybersecurity. I recovered their massive, bloated email databases when they clicked on stupid phishing links. They called it fixing the computers and refused to put me on the executive payroll because, as my father always said, family pitches in. I was just the it girl. What Arthur and Julian never seemed to understand was that whoever builds the castle walls holds the keys to every single secret room inside them. I walked back into the private dining room. The string quartet in the corner was playing something bright and classical. The silver balloons floated against the ceiling. The enormous custom banner behind my father read, "A legacy of generosity." I dropped a heavy stack of printed server logs right in the middle of the table. The thud it made silenced the entire room. The string quartet faltered and stopped playing. "What is this?" my father barked, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "This is highly inappropriate, Vivian. We are celebrating." I looked down at Eli, who was still staring at the insulting application. I placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You made it appropriate," I said, my voice eerily calm, "the exact second you used my son as a punchline for your ego." I reached out and flipped open the top file. The first page was a copy of my administrative lockout protocol. It showed a verified execution order severing executive access to the company servers, cloud storage, and internal communication networks. The timestamp was exactly 20 minutes ago. My father's eyes darted frantically to his phone sitting next to his wine glass. He tapped the screen. He opened his email app. The loading wheel spun, and then a red error message popped up. "Access denied. Contact administrator." The second page on the stack was a detailed decryption log. I slid it down the table toward Julian. I watched my brother's arrogant grin morph into pure, unadulterated panic. The logs laid out a very clear, very illegal trail. Massive offshore wire transfers, carefully disguised as vendor payments to non-existent logistics partners, routed directly from the employee pension fund into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. A shell corporation Julian owned. Year after year, the warehouse workers' retirement funds were quietly drained. That money paid for Julian's custom suits. It paid for his Porsche. And it funded the shiny new trust funds Caden and Blythe were holding in their hands right now. "You hacked my private emails," my father yelled, half rising from his chair. "You made me the system administrator," I replied coldly. "You demanded I run security audits every quarter to ensure our compliance. I finally audited you." Julian slammed his fist on the table, knocking over his water glass. "You're out of your mind. This is fabricated. You printed out fake spreadsheets because you're bitter." Daniel stood up. He didn't say a word, but he stepped right behind Eli's chair, crossing his arms. Daniel is 6'3" and works in commercial construction. His presence was large, dense, and menacing. "Sit back down, Julian," Daniel said quietly. Julian sat. My sister-in-law, Renata, slowly picked up the decryption log. She read the first few lines, then looked at Julian's terrified, sweating face. She dropped the paper like it was on fire. I pulled one final document from the bottom of the stack. It was a heavily redacted loan application from a private wealth bank in Zurich. My father saw the bank logo at the top of the page. He reached across the table, his hands trembling violently. "Vivian, stop, please. Put that away. We can talk about this. I can cut a check for Eli tonight." Julian swallowed hard, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple. "What is that one?" I looked dead at my father. I wanted him to feel exactly how Eli had felt 10 minutes ago. When the pension fund wasn't enough to cover Julian's disastrous commercial real estate investments 2 years ago, the company needed a massive line of credit to stay afloat. But your credit was tapped out, Arthur. The banks wouldn't give you another dime without triggering an audit. I slid the paper to the center of the table. So you used a different social security number. The room was dead silent. You used Eli's, I said. You forged a 15-year-old boy's identity to take out a $400,000 liability loan. Eli's head snapped up. He looked at me, then at the man at the head of the table. Grandpa did what? My father couldn't meet his grandson's eyes. He looked down at his half-eaten prime rib. Eli, buddy, it was just on paper. It was a bridge loan. I was going to pay it off before you ever turned 18. It was just a formality. Do not speak to him, I snapped. I reached down and gathered the sticky note, the server logs, and the fraudulent loan application. I slid them neatly back into a manila folder. My attorney, Sable Farrow, delivered a physical dossier to the FBI field office at exactly 3 o'clock today. I told them. They already have the drive. They have the wire transfers. They have the forged signatures. And we haven't even discussed what I found on the backup servers regarding the tax filings yet. I looked at my mother, who was sitting frozen, a napkin pressed over her mouth. Enjoy the trust funds, I said. I touched Daniel's arm. Let's go. We walked out of the Sterling room without looking back. The valet brought our car around in silence. Daniel tipped the kid a 20, opened the back door for Eli, and then got in the driver's seat. We drove for 10 minutes before anyone spoke. The streetlights of Castle flickered across the dark interior of our sedan. Am I going to jail? Eli asked from the back seat. His voice cracked. He sounded so young, so completely out of his depth. Daniel looked at me, his jaw muscles working. No, Eli, Daniel said, keeping his eyes on the road. You're a minor. You didn't sign anything. Your grandfather committed federal identity fraud. He's the one who needs a lawyer. He stole from me, Eli whispered, and then he gave me a job application. He's a coward, I said softly. I reached back and squeezed his knee. And we are done with them. I thought the worst was over. I thought walking out of that restaurant, dropping the bomb, and letting the authorities handle it would be the end of my involvement. I had done my part. The servers were locked, the evidence was handed over, and my family was finally going to face the consequences of their arrogance. I was wrong. By Monday morning, my phone had 47 missed calls. Most were from Julian, ranging from pleading voicemails begging me to unlock the servers so they could run payroll, to screaming, unhinged threats about destroying my life. 3 were from Jasper Locke, the company's chief financial officer, demanding an emergency meeting. I ignored all of them. I made coffee. Daniel took Eli to school, promising to keep his phone on loud in case Eli needed him. At 9:30, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my mother standing on the porch. Constance looked awful. The impeccable Parisian styling from the gala was gone. She wore an oversized cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back hastily. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Vivian, she said, her voice shaking. Let me in. I stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance. No. Say what you have to say from the porch. She blinked, shocked by the refusal. She looked around the quiet suburban street, terrified a neighbor might be watching. You locked the company servers. Jasper says the entire logistics network is paralyzed. Trucks aren't moving. Client data is inaccessible. You are costing your father millions of dollars a day. Arthur is costing himself millions, I corrected her. I'm protecting evidence. If I unlock those servers, the first thing Julian will do is run a wipe command on the financial directories. I'm not aiding and abetting. Constance stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You have to call the FBI and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them the logs were a test simulation. Something. Anything. He stole Eli's identity. Mom, he took out a massive loan in his name. If that defaulted, Eli's credit would be ruined before he even got his driver's license. We were going to pay it back. Constance hissed, suddenly angry. Julian just needed a little more time to liquidate his properties. You don't understand how business works, Vivian. You never did. You sit behind a computer screen and judge men who actually carry the weight of an empire. I stared at her. The sheer delusion was breathtaking. He embezzled from the pension fund. Constance waved her hand dismissively, as if stealing the retirement of warehouse workers was a minor clerical error. The workers are fine. Arthur was going to replace the funds at the end of the fiscal year. She grabbed the doorframe, her knuckles white. If this goes public, Julian goes to prison. Do you understand that? Your brother. My brother mocked my son while holding stolen money, I said. I started to close the door. Constance shoved her foot into the gap. It's not just Julian, she blurted out, her voice cracking. I stopped. What? Tears spilled over her lower lashes. The loan. The one Arthur took out in Eli's name. The bank required a secondary guarantor because of the age discrepancy. Arthur forged Eli's signature, yes, but he couldn't use his own name to back it. A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach. Who co-signed the loan, Mom? Constance looked down at the welcome mat. I did. I signed the guarantor paperwork. Arthur told me it was just a bridge loan for the company. If you don't retract that dossier, they're going to indict me too. I stood there, looking at the woman who had birthed me. The woman who had slid a blank job application across the table to her grandson with a smirk on her face, knowing full well she had helped steal his financial identity. She wasn't here because she felt guilty. She was here because she was terrified of federal prison. Get off my porch, I whispered. Vivian, please, get off my porch before I call the police and tell them you're trespassing. I slammed the door in her face and locked the deadbolt. I leaned against the heavy wood, my heart hammering against my ribs. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Sable Farrow, my attorney. Sable, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. My mother just showed up at my house. Don't speak to her, Sable said immediately. Her voice was clipped, professional, and entirely devoid of its usual warmth. Don't speak to anyone in your family. Where are you right now? I'm at home. Why? Did the field office review the drive? They have the drive, Sable said carefully. But we have a very immediate, very serious problem, Vivian. I need you to come to my office right now. What happened? I heard the rustle of heavy paper through the receiver. An hour ago, Sterling Logistics filed an emergency injunction against you in civil court. They aren't just demanding the server access back. They have retained the largest largest corporate litigation firm in the state. For what? I asked, confused. I gave the evidence to the FBI. The feds have jurisdiction. The feds move slow, Sable said grimly. And Arthur's lawyers are moving fast. They are suing you for corporate sabotage, breach of fiduciary duty, and extortion. They are claiming you fabricated the embezzlement logs to blackmail your father. That's absurd. I have the digital fingerprints. It's mathematically impossible to fake those logs. It doesn't matter if it's true, Sable sighed, and for the first time, she sounded tired. They are suing you for $50 million in damages, Vivian. They filed a motion to freeze all of your personal assets pending the trial. Your bank accounts, your house, Daniel's business accounts, everything. The cold knot in my stomach turned to lead. I looked around my quiet living room, at the framed photos of Eli on the mantle, at the modest furniture Daniel and I had bought when we first got married. They're trying to starve us out, I realized aloud. They have unlimited resources to drag this civil case out for years before the FBI even convenes a grand jury, Sable confirmed. If the judge signs the asset freeze this afternoon, you won't be able to buy groceries by tomorrow morning. Go to the bank, Sable ordered, her voice dropping an octave and losing all of its usual polished calm. Withdraw whatever you can in cashier's checks and cash before 1 p.m. I am filing an emergency counter motion to block the freeze, but Arthur's lawyers are using an ex parte filing. They're claiming you're a flight risk who might liquidate the embezzled funds you supposedly stole. They know I didn't steal anything. They know, Sable agreed sharply. The judge doesn't. Go. I hung up. The silence in my house was suddenly deafening. I walked into the kitchen, where Daniel was making a turkey sandwich for Eli's lunch tomorrow. He was humming quietly to himself. He looked up, saw my face, and immediately set the knife down on the counter. What? He asked. I told him. I watched his expression shift from confusion to a hard, settled anger. Daniel had built his commercial construction firm from the ground up over 15 years. He had payroll on Friday. 12 guys relying on his accounts to feed their own families. They're freezing my business accounts? He asked, his voice dangerously low. They're freezing everything with my name attached to it. And since we filed jointly, and my name is on the mortgage and the primary business operating account, I swallowed hard. Yes, he didn't yell. He didn't punch a wall or throw the plate. He just reached over, grabbed his keys from the ceramic bowl, and looked at me. Get your coat. We have 40 minutes. We drove to the local branch in near silence. I transferred everything from our joint savings into a new account I opened online in Daniel's sole name while we sat at red lights, praying the digital transfer would clear the servers before the legal freeze took effect. At the teller window, I withdrew $5,000 in cash, the maximum they'd let me take without triggering a 3-day administrative hold. Daniel sat with the branch manager in a glass office, trying frantically to firewall his business operating account from our personal assets. We walked out into the crisp afternoon air with a thick manila envelope of $100 bills and a deep, suffocating sense of dread. I have to call my foreman, Daniel said, unlocking the car doors. If the operating account freezes, I can't pay the suppliers for the drywall at the Elm Street site. The job stops. The client sues me for breach of contract. I'm sorry, I whispered. Daniel, I'm so sorry. He stopped and looked at me over the roof of the sedan. His eyes were fierce. Do not apologize to me. Your father is the one swinging the bat. You just caught him cheating. We'll figure this out. But figuring it out was easier said than done. By 3 p.m., I stopped at a pharmacy to pick up a prescription for Eli. I swiped my debit card. The machine beeped angrily. Declined. I checked my banking app while standing in the aisle. A stark red banner stretched across the top of the screen. Account restricted. Please contact customer support. They had done it. Arthur and Julian had successfully weaponized the legal system to cut off my air supply. I drove straight to Sable's office downtown. Her firm was on the 12th floor of a glass and steel building that felt entirely too clean for the kind of dirt we were currently dealing with. She already had the 50-page injunction printed out and spread across her wide mahogany conference table. It's a textbook slap suit, Sable said, tossing a yellow highlighter onto the table. Strategic lawsuit against public participation. But they're adapting it for corporate sabotage. They want to bury you in discovery requests, bleed you dry in legal fees, and force you to settle out of court by retracting your evidence to the FBI. Can they do that? The FBI already has the drive. The FBI has a drive, Sable corrected, leaning back in her leather chair. If Arthur's lawyers convince a civil judge that you fabricated that drive to extort the company, the FBI will drop the criminal investigation. They won't touch a case tainted by an extortionist informant. It's a brilliant, evil strategy. They don't have to prove you're guilty of anything. They just have to cast enough doubt on your credibility that the feds back off. I looked down at the paperwork. There were sworn affidavits attached to the back of the filing. I flipped through them. There was one from Jasper Locke, the company's chief financial officer, swearing under penalty of perjury that the pension fund was fully funded and that I had exhibited erratic, disgruntled outbursts at work over the past 6 months. There was one from Julian, claiming I had demanded $1 million payout and an executive VP title on Friday morning before the gala. And then there was one from Constance. I picked up my mother's sworn statement. It was short, just 2 paragraphs. It stated that I had called her on Saturday morning, threatening to ruin the family financially if Arthur didn't pay for Eli's future college tuition. My stomach turned over. The words blurred on the page. She lied, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She actually signed a piece of paper lying to a federal judge. They are circling the wagons, Sable said gently. Arthur holds the purse strings. Constance is protecting her lifestyle, and Julian is protecting his freedom. You are the only threat to all 3 of those things. So what do? We fight the injunction. We go to court on Wednesday morning to argue against the asset freeze. I need every text message, every email, every voicemail you have from them over the last 6 months, especially the voicemails Julian left you yesterday. We need to prove they are the ones panicking, not you. I handed her my phone. Take them all. I went home to a house that suddenly felt like a fortress under siege. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen island, a yellow legal pad covered in frantic math in front of of him. He had managed to secure a small, temporary line of credit through an old buddy in the trades to cover his payroll, but it was at a brutal interest rate. Eli was sitting on the living room couch, pretending to do his history homework, but his eyes kept darting toward us. He knew something was deeply wrong. You can't hide a frozen bank account from a 15-year-old for long. Not when the pizza delivery guy has to be paid in crisp $100 bills from a stash hidden in my sock drawer. That evening, just after 9, my phone rang. Not my regular ringtone. It was the distinct chime of a secure VoIP app I used exclusively for internal IT communications at Sterling Logistics. The caller ID was just a string of masked IP numbers. I hesitated, then answered. Hello, Vivian. The voice was low, rushed, and echoing slightly. Tell me you're not on a recorded line. I recognized the voice immediately. Arlo. He was a junior server tech I had hired 2 years ago straight out of community college. Brilliant kid, terrible posture, lived almost entirely on energy drinks. He was the only other person at Sterling who actually understood the back-end architecture I had built. I'm not recorded, I said, stepping out onto the back patio into the freezing night air and sliding the glass door shut behind me. Arlo, you shouldn't be calling me. Jasper will have them checking the network logs. I'm routing through 3 offshore VPNs, they won't find it, he said quickly. Listen, it's a madhouse here. Jasper Locke had it tear apart your office. They seized your desktop, your monitors, all your external drives. They brought in some aggressive outside forensic firm from Chicago this afternoon. Let them, I said, pulling my cardigan tighter around my chest. I wiped my local machines on Friday before the party. There's nothing there. That's not why I'm calling, Arlo said, his breath hitching slightly over the line. Vivian, they're not just looking for what you took. They're planting things. I froze. What do you mean? I was doing routine maintenance on the secondary backup servers at 4 this morning. The outside guys didn't realize I still had a backdoor shell open on Terminal 3. I watched them, I watched them inject a massive folder of offshore wire receipts into your hidden admin directory. Receipts with your name on them. They're falsifying the system metadata to make it look like you were the one draining the pension fund, not Julian. My blood ran completely cold. The civil suit wasn't just a tactic to starve me out. It was a smokescreen to buy them time. They were framing me for the embezzlement. Can you prove they injected the files? I asked, my grip tightening on the phone until my knuckles ached. I pulled a snapshot of the server state 30 seconds before they did it, Arlo said. I have the diff log. It shows exactly when the fake files were created, the external IP address that injected them, and Jasper Locke's user ID approving the bypass protocol. But Viv, if they catch me with this, I'm going to prison. They'll ruin my life. Arlo, you need to send me that snapshot. I can't send it over the network. They're monitoring all outbound traffic, watching for anomalies. I put it on a physical flash drive. He sounded terrified, his voice cracking. I want to help you, Vivian. I really do. You were the only boss who ever treated me like a human being instead of a code monkey. But I can't get dragged into a federal court case against Arthur Trask. You won't, I promised, though I had absolutely no idea if I could keep that promise. Where are you right now? I'm at the diner off Route 9, the one with the broken neon coffee cup. I get off shift in 20 minutes. I'll tape the drive under the last booth in the back section. Just don't tell them it came from me. Please, I won't. Thank you, Arlo. The line went dead. I stood on the patio for a long time, the cold seeping through my sweater and into my bones. Arthur wasn't just trying to silence me anymore. He was actively trying to put his own daughter in a federal penitentiary to save his son. I walked back inside. The warmth of the house felt strange, almost undeserved. Daniel looked up from his legal pad, noting the rigid set of my jaw. Get your coat, I told him quietly, so Eli wouldn't hear. We have to go for a drive. Daniel didn't ask questions. He just nodded, grabbed his heavy wool coat from the back of the chair, and followed me out to the garage. We left Eli on the couch with strict instructions not to open the door for anyone, not even the delivery guy. We'd order pizza online and tell them to leave it on the mat. The drive to Route 9 was tense. The heater in the sedan struggled against the November chill, rattling softly. I stared out the passenger window at the passing strip malls and dark storefronts. My father's logistics company wasn't just a business. It was an institution in this county. He knew the judges, he knew the bankers, he knew the local police chief. The realization that he was using all that institutional weight to crush his own daughter was settling over me like a suffocating blanket. The diner was exactly as Arlo described. A faded, aluminum-sided relic from the 70s with a sputtering neon sign shaped like a coffee mug. Only half the letters in diner were lit. There were maybe 3 cars in the lot. It didn't feel clandestine. It just felt lonely. Keep the car running, I told Daniel. I went inside alone. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully, entirely at odds with the smell of stale fry oil and burnt coffee. A single waitress was wiping down the counter. She didn't even look up. I walked straight to the back section, past a couple of long-haul truckers hunched over plates of eggs. The last booth was empty, the red vinyl seats cracked and patched with duct tape. I slid into the booth. My heart was thumping in my throat, but not from fear of being caught, from the sheer, pathetic absurdity of what my life had become in 48 hours. I reached under the sticky laminate table. My fingers brushed against a wad of dried gum, and I recoiled. I tried again, sweeping my hand further back. I felt a strip of rough masking tape. I peeled it off. Stuck to the adhesive was a cheap blue plastic thumb drive, the kind you buy in a 3-pack at an office supply store. I slipped it into my pocket, stood up, and walked out without ordering anything. Back in the car, I handed the drive to Daniel. He looked at it, his face illuminated by the dashboard lights. This is it? He asked. That's the proof they're framing me, I said, my voice trembling for the first time all night. Let's go home. It took me 20 minutes to set up an old, disconnected laptop on the kitchen island. I wasn't about to plug an untested drive into a machine connected to our home network, not with Jasper Locke and a Chicago forensic team actively trying to ruin me. I booted it up, inserted the drive, and opened Arlo's files. He had given me exactly what he promised. The diff logs, the differential snapshots of the server state before and after the breach. It was a digital fingerprint showing a massive data injection at 4:12 a.m. Thousands of fake wire receipts, carefully constructed to to match the missing pension funds, all routed to a dummy offshore account with my name listed as the primary beneficiary. The logs clearly showed the external IP address that pushed the files, and more importantly, it showed the administrative override authorized by Jasper Locke's credentials. They had literally created a fake paper trail to make me the embezzler. Daniel leaned over my shoulder, reading the lines of code and file names. He didn't understand the syntax, but he understood the summary I was giving him. "They're going to hand this to the FBI," Daniel said, his voice hard. "They're going to say you locked the servers not to audit them, but to cover your tracks while you tried to extort the company. And since Arthur filed the civil suit first, claiming extortion, the narrative is already set," I muttered, rubbing my eyes. God, they move fast. I took a picture of the screen with my phone and sent it through an encrypted messaging app to Sable Farrow. She replied 2 minutes later. "This is good. Keep the physical drive safe. Bring it to my office tomorrow at 8 a.m. We use this to fight the injunction on Wednesday." I closed the laptop and unplugged it. We finally ate cold pizza standing over the kitchen counter. Eli came down, grabbed a slice, and looked back and forth between us. "Are we broke?" he asked bluntly. Daniel stopped chewing. He wiped his mouth with a paper towel. "No, Eli, we are not broke. Your mom's accounts are temporarily frozen because your grandfather is throwing a legal temper tantrum. We have cash. My business is running. You don't need to worry about the money." He forged my signature, Eli said, staring at the pepperoni on his slice. "Does that mean my credit is ruined?" "No," I told him gently, "because we caught it. The bank in Zurich will invalidate the loan once the federal fraud investigation officially opens. You are legally a minor. You cannot be held liable." "Caden got $100,000, Eli said quietly. "Blythe got $150. They were texting about it in the cousins group chat today. Caden is buying a Tesla. Blythe is going to Paris for the summer." He didn't sound jealous. He sounded hollowed out. "Eli, that money is stolen," I said, leaning across the counter. "It came from the retirement accounts of men and women who have worked in those warehouses for 30 years. Caden and Blythe might have it right now, but it's blood money. It's dirty." "I know," Eli said. He tossed the crust into the trash. "It just sucks that they get to be rich and happy, and we have to eat cold pizza and hide from the delivery guy." He walked back upstairs to his room. Daniel and I stood in silence, the weight of his teenage logic pressing down on us. He was right. It wasn't fair. The bad guys were currently winning, and we were the ones rationing cash. The next morning brought a fresh wave of exhaustion. Daniel left at dawn to meet his foreman and distribute the high-interest cash he'd scraped together to keep his crew working. I packed Eli a lunch and drove him to school, watching the rearview mirror out of sheer paranoia, even though I knew Arthur's lawyers preferred paperwork over tailing people. I arrived at Sable's office just before 8. Her assistant ushered me straight into the conference room. Sable was already there, drinking black coffee and reviewing a stack of printed emails. She looked sharp, rested, and ready for war. I handed her the blue flash drive. "This is the diff log," I said. "It proves Jasper Locke authorized the injection of fake files into my directory yesterday morning." Sable plugged it into a standalone tablet. She tapped the screen, her eyes scanning the raw data I had highlighted. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "Vivian," she said softly, "this is beautiful. Is it enough to lift the asset freeze?" "It's enough to blow their entire injunction out of the water," Sable replied. "They swore under penalty of perjury that you were the sole administrator and the only one with access to those directories. This log proves Jasper Locke bypassed your lockout to alter evidence. It's spoliation of evidence, perjury, and fraud upon the court. The judge will be furious." She unplugged the drive and dropped it into a heavy manila envelope, sealing it with red evidence tape. "We present this at the hearing tomorrow," Sable said, "but we have another issue, and it's complicated." She slid a plain white folder across the table toward me. I opened it. Inside was a copy of a real estate transfer deed. It was dated yesterday. "What is this?" I asked, scanning the legalese. "It's the deed to Julian and Renata's primary residence in Oak Brook," Sable said. "Yesterday afternoon, Julian transferred sole ownership of the house, the property, and the attached trust into Renata's name. He also formally filed for legal separation." I stared at her, stunned. "Separation? They've been married for 16 years. They were holding hands at the gala on Friday. It's asset protection," Sable explained smoothly. "Julian knows the FBI is reviewing the drive you gave them. If he is indicted for embezzling the pension fund, the federal government will seize his assets to pay back the victims. By transferring the house to Renata and filing for separation, he's trying to legally shield his wealth before the indictments drop. He's building a firewall between his crimes and his money. Can he do that? He can try, but it shows consciousness of guilt. He is terrified." Sable leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Here is where it gets messy for you. An hour ago, Renata's personal attorney contacted my office. Renata wants a meeting with you." "With me? Why?" "She claims she has information about Arthur's involvement in the loan taken out in Eli's name. She says she can prove Arthur knew about the embezzlement all along and actively helped Julian hide it." Sable took a sip of her coffee. "But she won't give us the evidence unless you agree to carve her out of any civil action you take against the family. She wants immunity from our side." I sat back in my chair, processing the sheer level of panic currently ripping through my family. Julian was trying to hide his money from the government. Renata was trying to sell out Arthur to save herself. My mother had already lied under oath to protect her lifestyle. They were turning on each other like starving rats in a barrel. "Set the meeting," I said. "Are you sure?" Sable warned. "Renata is manipulative. She's been living off Julian's stolen money just as long as he has. She drove a car paid for by warehouse workers' pensions to the gala." "I don't care about Renata's morals," I said coldly. "I care about clearing Eli's name and getting my bank accounts unfrozen. If she has Arthur dead to rights on the loan fraud, I want it." The meeting was set for 2 o'clock that afternoon at a neutral location, a quiet, upscale botanical garden cafe on the north side of the city. I arrived 10 minutes early. The cafe was practically empty, filled with the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids from the attached greenhouse. Renata walked in precisely at 2. She looked significantly worse than my mother had. The designer clothes were still there, but they hung slightly loose on her frame. She wasn't wearing wearing makeup, and she kept looking over her shoulder as if she expected Julian to walk in behind her. She sat down across from me, clutching a large leather tote bag. She ordered a green tea from the waiter, her voice shaking slightly. I didn't order anything. Vivian, she started, her voice tight. Thank you for coming. Skip the pleasantries, Renata. What do you have? She flinched at my tone but quickly recovered. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a thick, leather-bound notebook. She kept her hand firmly planted on the cover. Julian keeps meticulous records, Renata said softly. He doesn't trust computers. Not since you rebuilt the company network. He said you were always snooping. So he kept handwritten ledgers of the pension fund transfers. You stole his ledger. I took what I needed to survive, Renata shot back, a flash of genuine anger in her eyes. He came home yesterday screaming that we were going to lose everything. He forced me to sign separation papers. He told me it was a legal fiction to protect the house. But I know Julian. If he goes to prison, he'll let me drown. I have Caden and Blythe to think about. Caden has $100,000, I reminded her flatly. That trust fund was frozen this morning by the SEC, Renata revealed, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The FBI moved faster than Sable thought. They flagged the Cayman shell accounts at dawn. The kids' trusts are gone, Vivian. Every penny Julian promised them. A small, undeniable spark of vindication flared in my chest. Good. The ledger? I prompted. Arthur signed off on the transfers, Renata said. She opened the notebook to a bookmarked page. Look at the margins. Julian didn't move a single dollar out of the pension without Arthur's explicit written approval. Your father wasn't just turning a blind eye. He was taking a 30% cut of the stolen funds to prop up the company's failing European division. She slid the open notebook across the table. I looked down. The handwriting was unmistakable. There, next to a notation about a $2 million transfer to a dummy vendor, was my father's scrawled signature, along with a note, route 30% to Frankfurt accounts by Tuesday. A.T. He used the pension fund to float the European division? I asked, sickened. The European division had been hemorrhaging money for 5 years. Arthur had constantly bragged to the board about how his aggressive cost-cutting was saving it. He used it for everything, Renata said. And the loan in Eli's name? Arthur didn't just forge the signature. He used a notary from inside his own legal department to backdate the application. The notary's name is in here, too. This was the holy grail. The digital logs proved Julian took the money, but Arthur could always claim ignorance. He could claim Julian acted as a rogue executive. This ledger proved it was a massive, coordinated conspiracy at the very top of Sterling Logistics. Why are you giving this to me instead of the FBI? I asked, looking up at her. Renata's hands were trembling violently. Because Julian told me last night what Arthur's lawyers are planning to do to you. The injunction was just step 1. Step 2 is filing criminal theft charges against you locally, using the fake files Jasper planted. They want to get you arrested by the county police before the feds can intervene. Arthur has the local prosecutor in his pocket. They are going to perp walk you out of your house in front of your neighbors. Vivian. I stared at her, my blood turning to ice water. They're trying to get me arrested? Arthur said if you sit in a holding cell for 48 hours, you'll crack. You'll retract the evidence. He's furious about the gala. He said you embarrassed him in front of the board. He forged his grandson's identity, and he's mad I embarrassed him. I whispered, the sheer sociopathy of it taking my breath away. Renata pushed the ledger closer to me. Take it. Give it to Sable. Destroy them before they destroy you. Just promise me, when the dust settles, you won't come after me for the house. That's all I want. The house for me and the kids. I reached out and pulled the heavy leather book toward me. I didn't care about Renata's house. I didn't care if she lived in Oak Brook or a cardboard box. I won't sue you, I said. I put the ledger in my bag and stood up. I walked out of the greenhouse caf, the humid air instantly replaced by the biting wind of the street. I pulled my phone out and dialed Sable's number. Sable, I said the second she answered. I have Julian's physical ledger. It implicates Arthur directly, and it proves the notary on Eli's loan was an inside job. Bring it here immediately, Sable commanded. I can't, I said, looking down the street. A dark gray sedan had just pulled up to the curb 100 feet away. 2 men in heavy winter coats stepped out. They weren't armed, and they weren't moving like thugs in a movie, but they were looking directly at me. They were process servers. Or worse, private investigators hired by Arthur's legal team to track me down with the local warrant. Sable, I said, my voice tight. Arthur is accelerating. Renata says they're trying to push local criminal charges against me today using the fake files. He's using the local prosecutor. Sable swore softly. If the county issues a warrant based on Jasper's fabricated evidence, I can't stop the arrest. I can bail you out, but they will confiscate your phone, your bag, and any evidence on you during booking. Where is the ledger? It's in my bag. You cannot let the county police take that ledger, Sable said urgently. If it goes into a local evidence locker under the jurisdiction of Arthur's friends, it will disappear. It will be misplaced before trial. The 2 men in coats started walking toward me. They weren't running. They were just walking briskly, confident that I had nowhere to go. I'm heading to my car, I said, turning and walking the opposite direction, toward the parking garage. Do not go home, Sable warned. If there is a warrant, they will be waiting at your house. Go somewhere public. Stay surrounded by people. I am calling the federal prosecutor's office right now to try and force jurisdiction over the local warrant, but it takes time. You need to stall them for the next 4 hours. I hung up the phone and kept walking. I didn't run. Running is what guilty people do, and besides, my boots had a 2-inch heel and the pavement was slick with melting frost. I just kept a steady, even pace toward the entrance of the parking garage. Vivian Trask? The voice was directly behind me. I stopped and turned around. The 2 men were standing there, breathing plumes of white vapor into the cold air. They weren't cops. Up close, I could see they were wearing cheap, off-the-rack suits under their winter coats. One of them held out a thick manila envelope. You've been served, he said, his voice completely bored. He didn't wait for me to take it. He just dropped the envelope so it hit my chest and fell onto the wet concrete at my feet. Then the 2 of them turned around and walked back toward their sedan. I stood there for a second, my heart hammering against my ribs, and let out a long, ragged exhale. process servers. They were just updating the civil injunction paperwork. It wasn't the local police. Not yet. I picked up the damp envelope, got into my car, and locked the doors. I tossed the paperwork onto the passenger seat next to my bag. The heavy leather of Julian's ledger was pressing against the side of the canvas tote. Sable was right. If the county police picked me up on a fabricated warrant, this ledger would vanish into an evidence locker and conveniently get lost before trial. My father owned half the politicians in this county, which meant he owned the sheriff too. I couldn't keep it in the car. I couldn't take it home. I pulled out of the garage and merged onto the main road, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds. 2 blocks down, I saw the bright red and white sign of a franchised shipping store tucked into a strip mall next to a dry cleaner. I pulled in, parked right by the door, and grabbed the ledger. The bell chimed as I walked in. The store smelled like cardboard and packing tape. A teenager with acne and a blue polo shirt was leaning against the counter, scrolling on his phone. I need a priority overnight box, I told him, pulling my wallet out. The most secure one you have. Signature required on delivery. He slowly blinked at me, pointed to a rack of cardboard mailers, and went back to his phone. I grabbed a stiff cardboard express envelope, slid the leather notebook inside, and sealed it. I wrote Sable's firm's address on the destination label. For the return address, I just wrote Arthur Trask and the address of the Sterling Logistics corporate headquarters. Let them try to claim the mail was unauthorized. I paid cash. The kid printed the label, slapped it on the cardboard, and tossed it into a large canvas bin behind the counter. What time does the truck pick that up? I asked. 4:30. He mumbled. It was 2:40. It was out of my hands now. It was in the federal postal system, which Arthur couldn't touch with a local bribe. I walked back out to my car. I had just put my hand on the door handle when a white SUV with county municipal plates pulled into the strip mall lot. The light bar on the roof wasn't flashing, but it was moving too fast for a parking lot. It pulled up directly behind my sedan, blocking me in. 2 uniformed deputies stepped out. The older one rested his hand casually on his duty belt. "Vivian Trask?" he asked. The adrenaline that had been keeping me upright suddenly vanished, leaving me feeling hollow and exhausted. It was happening. "Yes, ma'am. I need you to step away from the vehicle. We have a warrant for your arrest issued by the county magistrate." People walking in and out of the dry cleaner stopped to stare. A woman holding an armful of plastic-wrapped shirts paused on the sidewalk. I felt my face flush with a hot, burning humiliation. I had never even had a speeding ticket. "What are the charges?" I asked, my voice miraculously steady. "Grand larceny, corporate espionage, and computer tampering," the deputy recited mechanically. He pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from a pouch on his back. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back, please." "I'm not resisting," I said. I turned around and offered my wrists. The metal was freezing against my skin. The click of the ratchet closing was the loudest sound I had ever heard. "We need to search your person and your belongings," the younger deputy said. He opened the passenger door of my car and pulled out my canvas tote bag. He dumped the contents onto the hood of his cruiser. My wallet, my keys, a tube of lip balm, some loose receipts, and the manila envelope the process servers had just thrown at me. He sifted through it all, frowned, and looked in the empty bag. "No laptop, no hard drives," he called out to his partner. "Put her in the back," the older deputy said. They guided me into the back of the SUV. The plastic seat was hard and uncomfortable. There were no door handles on the inside. I watched through the wire mesh partition as they bagged my phone and my wallet into a clear plastic evidence sack. They were looking for the fake diff logs Jasper had planted. They were looking for whatever Arthur told them I had stolen. But they were too late. Arlo's drive was already in a federal safe in Sable's office, and Julian's ledger was sitting in a canvas bin waiting for the afternoon post. The ride to the county precinct took 20 minutes. I stared out the window at the gray afternoon sky, trying to memorize the route, trying to keep my brain occupied so I wouldn't panic. I thought about Daniel. I thought about Eli coming home from school to find me gone. Sable had my husband's number. She would call him. She would fix this. I just had to survive the next few hours without saying a word. Booking was a slow, bureaucratic nightmare designed to strip away your dignity layer by layer. They took my coat. They took my belt. They made me take out my shoelaces so I wouldn't hang myself. I was fingerprinted, photographed, and led down a hallway that smelled of industrial bleach and old sweat. They put me in a holding cell with concrete walls and a single stainless steel toilet in the corner. The door was heavy bars painted a sickly mint green. There was one other woman in the cell, sleeping huddled under a thin paper blanket on the opposite bench. I sat down on the cold concrete. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant echo of a heavy door slamming or a radio squawking. I pulled my knees to my chest and wrapped my arms around them. I was shivering, though I couldn't tell if it was from the temperature or the shock. Some of us are just born to serve. Arthur's handwriting on that yellow sticky note flashed through my mind. He had really done it. He had manufactured federal crimes, forged logs, bought a magistrate, and thrown his own daughter into a concrete cage just to teach me a lesson about power. He wanted to break me. 2 hours passed. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a low, maddening hum. My back ached from the hard bench. Finally, footsteps echoed down the hall. A guard appeared on the other side of the bars. He unlocked the heavy door and slid it open. "Trask, let's go. Your lawyer is here." A wave of profound relief washed over me. Sable had worked a miracle. The federal prosecutor must have stepped in. I stood up, my stocking feet cold against the floor, and followed the guard down the corridor. We didn't go toward the front desk. We went deeper into the administrative wing of the precinct. The guard opened a heavy wooden door to a windowless interview room. There was a cheap laminate table and 2 plastic chairs. In here, the guard grunted. He didn't follow me in. He shut the door behind me. There was no Sable Pharaoh waiting for me. Sitting in the plastic chair on the far side of the table, wearing a dark cashmere overcoat and a perfectly knotted silk tie, was my father. Arthur Trask looked entirely out of place in the sterile, grim room. He looked like he had just stepped out of a boardroom meeting. He had a paper cup of coffee in front of him. I stopped just inside the door. My lungs suddenly felt too small. "What is this?" I asked. Arthur looked up. His expression was a carefully practiced mask of sorrowful disappointment. "Hello, Vivian. Sit down." Where is my lawyer? She's currently arguing with a desk sergeant in the lobby, Arthur said mildly. They're processing some paperwork. It might take a while. I asked the sheriff for 10 minutes alone with my daughter. He's a reasonable man. I didn't move. I didn't sit. I just stared at the man who had raised me, the man who had bought the cage I was currently standing in. You look terrible, Arthur noted, his eyes drifting down to my missing shoelaces and the wrinkles in my blouse. This is not where you belong, Viv. This isn't the life you should be living. You put me here. You put yourself here. His voice hardened slightly, the facade cracking, just a fraction. You locked my company down. You stole proprietary data. You threatened your own family over a petty grudge about a job application. You forged Eli's signature to cover Julian's embezzlement. I fired back, my voice echoing off the cinderblock walls. Don't sit there in your cashmere coat and pretend you're the victim, Arthur. You stole from the pension fund to float your failing European division. I saw the ledger. I know about the 30% cut. Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't look surprised. He just took a slow sip of his coffee. Renata is a hysterical woman, he said calmly. She's trying to protect a house she didn't earn. Whatever she showed you, whatever notebook Julian supposedly scribbled in, it's hearsay. It's the desperate fiction of a failing marriage. It's physical evidence, I said. And it's already in the mail. A tiny muscle in Arthur's jaw twitched. Just once. It was the only sign that I had actually hit him. You're playing a very dangerous game, Vivian, he said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the laminate table. The fake paternal concern was gone now. His eyes were flat and cold. You think you figured it all out. You think because you understand servers and firewalls, you understand how the world works. You don't. You have no idea what it takes to keep 1,000 people employed. You have no idea the compromises required to build a legacy. Stealing from your workers isn't a compromise. It's a crime. It's cash flow, he snapped. It was a temporary reallocation of internal funds. I was going to make the pension whole after the first quarter. By opening fraudulent loans in your grandchildren's names, Arthur stood up. He smoothed the front of his coat. I came here to offer you a way out. One last chance before I let the county prosecutor proceed with a grand jury indictment against you. I don't want your way out. You haven't heard it yet, he said softly. He walked around the table until he was standing just a few feet away from me. I refused to back up. I refused to give him an inch. You sign a sworn affidavit stating that you fabricated the decryption logs. You state that you locked the servers in a manic episode because you felt underappreciated at work. You drop the ridiculous allegations against Julian. And you return the drive and whatever notebook Renata gave you. And if I do, I asked, my voice thick with disgust. I drop the civil suit. I unfreeze your assets. I make a phone call, and the county prosecutor drops these charges today. You walk out of here, go home to Daniel and Eli, and we never speak of this again. I'll even pay off that loan in Eli's name by Friday. Clean slate. He said it with total conviction. He honestly believed he was being generous. And if I refuse, Arthur's expression turned to stone. Then the asset freeze stays in place. Daniel's business goes under by the end of the month. You sit in a cell awaiting trial while your defense attorney bleeds whatever cash you have left. I have the resources to keep you tied up in court for the next 10 years. Vivian, I will bury you so deep in legal fees, you'll be paying them off until Eli is my age. I looked at him, not with fear, and not even with anger anymore, just with an overwhelming sense of pity. For 35 years, I had viewed Arthur Trask as an immovable mountain. Now, sitting across from me in a cheap cashmere coat he was trying to use as armor, he just looked like an old, desperate man who had run out of road. You don't have the resources anymore, Arthur, I said quietly. He let out a short, patronizing laugh. Vivian, your net worth is currently zero, I interrupted. The SEC froze the Cayman accounts at dawn. They froze the trust funds you gave Caden and Blythe. And as of an hour ago, Julian's house in Oakbrook is useless to you because Renata gave me the physical ledger proving you authorized every single illegal transfer. The blood drained from my father's face so fast he looked like he might pass out. The patronizing smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed, hollow-eyed stare. You're lying, he whispered. I mailed it to my lawyer 30 seconds before your rented deputies put me in handcuffs, I said, leaning forward so he could hear every single word. It's in the federal postal system. You can't bribe a postmaster, Arthur. You can't buy off the U.S. attorney. Your local magistrate doesn't mean a damn thing anymore. Right on cue, the heavy wooden door clicked open. Sable Farrow stepped into the room. She wasn't alone. Behind her stood a tall man in a dark suit with an ID badge clipped to his belt, and the local desk sergeant, who suddenly looked very sweaty and very uncomfortable. Vivian, stand up, Sable said. Her voice was pure ice. I stood. Arthur scrambled to his feet. Now listen here. This is a private conversation, Arthur Trask, the tall man said, stepping past Sable. I'm Special Agent Bowen with the FBI's White Collar Division. The local charges against your daughter have been dismissed. The United States Attorney's Office is officially assuming jurisdiction over the investigation into Sterling Logistics, based on evidence of federal wire fraud, identity theft, and witness tampering. Arthur's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at the desk sergeant, his local guy, the guy he had probably bought a dozen expensive steak dinners for over the years. The sergeant wouldn't meet his eyes. He looked firmly at the floor. Sable walked over to me and handed me a large plastic bag containing my coat, my phone, and my canvas tote. Let's go home, Vivian. I took the bag. I slipped my coat over my shoulders. I didn't say goodbye to Arthur. I didn't gloat. There was nothing left to say to a man who had tried to build a legacy on the back of his own grandson and expected me to smile while he did it. I just walked out the door, leaving him standing alone in the bleak, windowless room. The drive back to my house was quiet. Sable drove. She told me the injunction against my bank accounts had been lifted the moment the feds validated Arlo's diff logs, showing Jasper Locke had tampered with the servers. Daniel's business was safe. The suppliers would be paid. The drywall at the Elm Street site would go up on schedule. When we pulled into my driveway, the porch light was on. It was barely 6 in the evening, but the November sky was already pitch black. Daniel opened the front door before I even made it up the steps. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask about the lawyers or the cops. He just wrapped his arms around me, and pulled me into the hallway, burying his face in my neck. His chest was heaving. Eli came down the stairs a second later. He was wearing an oversized hoodie, his hands shoved deep into the pockets. When he saw me, his shoulders dropped, and the tight, anxious lines around his mouth finally relaxed. "Are we okay?" he asked, his voice cracking just a little. I looked at my son, the boy who was told he was only born to serve, the boy who was going to grow up knowing the exact difference between inherited wealth and actual worth. "We're okay," I said. It took 2 years for the federal courts to dismantle Sterling Logistics. Julian took a plea deal and turned on Arthur to get a reduced sentence. Arthur fought it all the way to a jury trial and lost. The judge gave him 8 years in federal prison and ordered total asset forfeiture to restitute the warehouse workers' pension fund. Constance moved into a small, rented condo in a neighboring state, too ashamed to show her face at the country club ever again. I didn't watch the sentencing. I was too busy. I had taken a job as the lead systems architect for a mid-sized cybersecurity firm downtown. They paid me what I was worth. They respected my boundaries. And when Eli turned 17, I handed him a sealed envelope at the dinner table. He opened it cautiously, probably half expecting another blank job application. Inside was a single piece of heavy bond paper from a Zurich bank, stamped with a massive red seal, fraudulent account terminated, zero liability. Eli looked up at me, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. "Happy birthday," I told him. He didn't say a word. He just folded the paper, put it in his pocket, and started eating his dinner. The castle walls had finally fallen, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one cleaning up the rubble.